This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
June E. Sullivan, 113 Main Street, Rockport, Massachusetts.
Thank you. So, we'd like to start off the interview with asking, where did you grow up as a child?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And you're 95, correct?
Yes.
How do you still stay active for yourself and your community today?
How do I stay active?
Yes.
Well, I participate in my walking with a walker and my dog every day downtown. And I spend time downtown as long as it doesn't get too rainy or snowy, because I go into the coffee shop and have a cup of coffee. I do any errands that I have to do in the bank. But that's probably in the neighborhood of an hour to 2 hours that I'm out. But that's really the extent of my activity, except for feeding the birds. I feed the birds in the morning out in my porch and in the afternoon out in my porch. And I like to watch them. They're very interesting if you have the time, which I do, to observe them.
And you also participate in the memorial service?
Oh, yes. I'm also a member of the Memorial Day Committee through the American Legion. And I am assigned to gather the different ministers to participate in the Memorial Day Parade up at the cemetery for the greeting by one minister for the beginning of the ceremony, and then the end of the ceremony by another minister. These are all different ministers of different churches. And then we continue up to the site of the remembrance of all the Navy personnel who have been lost at sea or are presently active. And I have to have 2 different ministers to do the opening and the closing. The different churches that participate are the First Baptist Church by Reverend Wigton, Reverend Karen Wade of the Episcopal Church, the Congregational Church. I don't know what the minister's name is there.
June, can we continue to the next question, please?
Oh, sure.
And why did you decide to join the military, and at what age?
Well, I joined the Army Nurse Corps because we had many young men that were overseas, and I joined up because I could do my nursing services, and I joined May 26th, 1943, and I shipped overseas June 5th, in 1943.
So what was your actual job when you were overseas?
To do the care of all of any wounded that were injured. The first group was from the Afro Italian campaign.
So did you also treat German soldiers?
Pardon?
Did you also treat German soldiers?
When our hospital was turned into a German prisoner of war hospital, Yes, we had the whole hospital that was captured in um, that was captured in France. And so we received all of their patients, all of their doctors, and all of their nurses.
How did you feel about treating German soldiers?
Well, it follows in medicine, there's really no uh, discrimination to take care of people, no matter whether it's their um, religion, color, or their uh, background of any country.
How do you think Americans felt about you and the other Army nurses helping the German soldiers?
Um, that I couldn't say, except for the reaction of our own men who were with our hospital. Um, they also had to help take care of these patients. Um, I don't know what their feelings were because they never expressed their feelings about it.
So, did you ever fear that the German prisoners could revolt or inflict harm on you?
No, I never had that sensation, but we did have to have a corps man with us when we were treating them, just as a precautionary measure.
Okay. So, where were you stationed, and what changes did you face when you went overseas?
When we were stationed first in England, and we were not used to the blackout that England had as a mandatory thing, and that was no visible lights once the sun went down. And that was something that we learned to deal with.
What kinds of relationships did you make when you went overseas?
You mean with the people that we worked with? Well, you didn't really make relationships except within your own group. For instance, we could not fraternize with the men, and we worked with them, but we couldn't fraternize with them, so we didn't have any really friendship beyond the site of our work.
What about your patients?
No, we did have certain patients that you had great sympathy for, especially when we had our hospital turned into the German prisoner of war hospital, because many of the young men that we treated were in their early teens from the German army. Anywhere from 15 years old up to 19 or 20. They were all the enlisted personnel. The officer type of individual that we had as a patient would be the SS troopers. So they would be the higher echelon.
And did you meet any other significant people when you were overseas?
We became very friendly with some of the English people that were stationed near our first post, and I kept up communication with that family for quite a few years after I got home, but that was all.
Okay. You were often in danger of bombings and attacks. And were you ever scared for your life, and how did you cope with that stress?
Well, let's put it this way: when you're young and 22, you don't think that you don't really think that you're in fear of your life because you're young. Um, when we were in London, the bombs would begin about 5 p.m. And they would continue through the night. The bombing would stop once daylight was in. Some parts of London were absolutely leveled, other parts were not even hit. So that's the only thing I can tell you.
Was that stressful though? Was there a way you had to cope with that?
I don't know that I was a particularly stressful person. I'm even at the age of 95, I'm not particularly stressful. So that's all I can ask or answer you.
As an army nurse, you witnessed the horrors of war. What were the worst injuries you had to treat and try to heal?
Some of the worst type were the bayonet wounds. A bayonet wound on the outside doesn't look very lethal, but it's the inside of the person that has been bayoneted that is really your problem. We had also gunshot wounds, frozen feet, because that winter was the coldest winter in Europe. And when we treated our own United States soldiers, a lot of them had frozen feet. We were able to save some of them, but some of them had to have their feet amputated because gangrene had set in.
So did anyone die? Well, I imagine that some people you cared for were probably injured beyond the point of where your medical assistance could have saved them. So did anyone die on your watch, and how could you cope with that?
Well, I have to be truthful. We never had any particular incident that I remember that someone died in the department that I worked in. My department was the chest surgery. And I don't remember, I do remember one German patient who was treated, and we became quite friendly with him because he spoke several languages. And he was eventually assigned when our hospital disbanded as a prisoner of war hospital, and they sent different areas to different countries, England, United States, and Russia. There was one young man that who we had all become friendly with because he was very smart and spoke several languages and acted as our interpreter because he was a German prisoner of war. And we had many types of German prisoner of war patients, and they all didn't speak really German in what you call High German or Low German. They call it Platt German, which is Low German. We had patients from Russia, from the Ukraine, and they spoke different languages. So this young man, who was very helpful as an interpreter, he was sent to Russia. And apparently in Russia, they didn't treat the patients as, what would you call, forgiving as we did. And so they made him sleep out in the cold. So later on, his sister, who had studied to be a doctor, wrote to me in America and said that he was sent home to die. He weighed 85 pounds and he was only 21.
What do you believe your fondest memory was from the wartime?
My fondest, Jeepers, I don't know as I had any fondest memory, except when we were going to go home. We were all excited because we had been over there almost 3 years. And so that fondest memory that I have is coming into New York Harbor and seeing the Statue of Liberty. That's the fondest one, yeah.
What about the story of where you saved one of the man's badges? When you saved the German soldier's badge?
Oh, that was an incident, as I said, on the department that I worked primarily. And he was a very high officer in the SS troopers, and he had lost part of his leg and part of one arm. And so we had him in an isolated area, not that he gave us any trouble, but because he was so high in the German ranks, we had him in a private area or a secluded area. And so one of the corps men with me wanted to take his Iron Cross, and I wouldn't let him take it, because the Iron Cross that he had earned for his country would be equivalent to the highest honor that a soldier in America would earn. So I wouldn't let Jensen, the corps man, take it.
What do you believe the worst or most profound memory is that you have from the war?
The most profound words.
Worst or most profound?
Well, it wasn't the worst thing I remember, and it was not overseas. It was when Pearl Harbor was bombed, because I was still a young nurse in Boston, and we thought that the United States had been attacked. And that was what I would say would be my worst feeling or memory. Yeah. That's about what I could say, yeah.
Is it correct that you were stationed during D-Day?
Did what?
That you were stationed during D-Day?
In France? No, not France. We were in England, and we had been setting up hospitals. And one particular evening, or night I should say, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we heard this drone overhead. So we all went out of our tents to see what was going on, and it was the gliders going over to land in France, in Normandy. And then the next day we found out that that had been D-Day.
Did you receive any patients from D-Day, or did you witness the horrors?
Oh, yes. We had to pick up our hospital, move it closer to the coast, received any patients, and then we went across the English Channel at night. We had to go at night to go to France.
So, is there anyone you met overseas that you're still in contact with today?
There's one person, if she's still living today. She lived in Maine, and her name was Grace Russell, and she lived up in Rockport, Maine. But I haven't talked to her so far this year. I spoke with her last year. She happens to be 1 year older than I am, so she would be 96 right now. I'm 95. She'd be 96 going on 97, because I'm going on 96. Yeah.
Were there any decisions you made that you would regret today?
Did what?
Any decisions you made overseas that you would regret today?
No, no, no.
What do you feel that you sacrificed?
What did what?
What did you sacrifice to be part of the war?
What did I sacrifice? I suppose sacrifice being home. That's, I don't know, except the years we lost overseas because we were, directly contacted with in connection with that family. Yeah.
When I say, when I ask for a story from your time in the war, what is like the first story that would pop into your head?
What is the first story that comes to me from being in the war? I really can't say what would be the first thing that would come to my mind. I think the things that would come to my mind is when we received the first patients from the Afro-Italian campaign, because then it brought it right to, what would you say, right to your front door that, yes, we are at war. That's all I can say, I guess. I don't know what else I could say.
How many patients do you think you had to treat? How many patients did you see?
Oh my goodness. Hundreds. We saw hundreds of patients. The way things would be, see, we were a station hospital. When they had when the war was going on and people were wounded, they would be going first to to a field. In other words, the field, what they call a field, like EMTs and so forth. And then they would be designated to go to certain areas. So your areas, in those days, you had your field hospital. Then you'd have your, first would be the emergency, then the field hospital, and then the station hospital. And ours was a station hospital. So it was according to the, what would you call the setting up of who's the ones that are wounded the most that has to be seen right away. They were either flown to a general hospital, and some of them would then be flown to the United States to be taken care of. And I do remember I had one patient, a young Frenchman. I think I said this before, not today, but I've said it before, that we had a young French young soldier who had been conscripted into the German army. And every time I would be going towards that tent, I would hear all this uprising and, confusion and upset. So we tried to find out what was going on. And what it was is that this young Frenchman from the Alsace-Lorraine, every time he had a chance, he would start singing the Marseillaise. And that would get the Germans, because he was in the German, conscripted into the German army. So every time he had a chance, he would sing the Marseillaise, and that would get the other German soldiers all upset, and they'd start fighting.
You told me that one of your patients gave you one of the medals he had earned.
Oh,
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Gunther Dolly. He was 19, and as I say, they were all so young that you felt sympathy for them, And somehow or another, when he left as a patient to be reassigned, he gave me his Luftwaffe wings. And that would be like an American giving his wings that he earned to somebody. Yeah.
So you said you grew up in Minneapolis.
Yes.
How did you end up coming to Rockport, Massachusetts?
Well, first of all, I came from Minneapolis. I came to Brockton, Massachusetts, because I had lost all my family, and my brother and I had to come to Brockton because our father lived there. So we came to Brockton. I grew up in Brockton afterwards. And then after the war, I came with my husband and visited Rockport, Massachusetts, and I fell in love with it. I wanted to move here.
How many children did you have?
7.
And what influence did your service have on your children? And did any of them follow in your footsteps
Yes.
to join the war?
My oldest son is a Vietnam veteran, and my youngest son is a Gulf War veteran. My oldest son was in the Army. My youngest son was in the Navy.
And what kind of an influence do you think you had on them?
I don't know. I guess they when they grew up and heard about different things, they'd always ask me about what did I do and so forth. So whether or not it had influence for them to be in the service, I think probably I should be truthful and say my husband and I made our oldest son, because he was going to be drafted. So we told him to go and be, in the service, because we didn't want him to try to get out of it. So whatever happened with him in the service, I have to take the blame for.
Was that hard for you to have?
No, it wasn't hard for me to take the blame, but what was hard for me is when the Vietnam veterans came home. The Vietnam veterans suffered a great deal of people ignoring them, not helping them, giving them any honor, and that hurt me physically and mentally, because those men had done their best and nobody welcomed them home.
What advice would you give someone going into a war today?
What advice would I give them if we were going up, which many of them, that you just have to do the best you can and hope for the best.
What do you think that you learned from your experience overseas that you took to your future?
What do I think what?
What did you learn from your experiences that you used in your future?
Well, I think that I've learned all my life, and I learned it in the service too. You have to cope with whatever comes your way and learn how to face it. That's the only way I can look at it.
How did you learn that when you were serving?
How did I learn it? When I was serving or when I was little?
When you were or either.
Well, I had to learn to cope with a lot as a child growing up, because I lost my mother when I was 6, my grandmother when I was 10. I had to move from an area in Minneapolis to Massachusetts, which was completely different in my life, but I coped with it. So we had to cope with that in the service, because we picked up our different sites and would move at the drop of a hat when we got orders, so you coped with it.
Well, Thank you very much, Jim. That was...
Well, I don't know if I'm any help, but, I just have to answer you truthfully.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.